one of the things that when we think about therapeutic communities, we think about meetings, right? Lots of meetings and people having dialogues.
Yeah.
One thing that, for example, Guattari was very much against the idea of consensus, of the idea that the meeting with patient staff and carers and families is to reach a consensus. He thought that consensus coming from a group of people, what he was trying to achieve was an understanding of madness and the madness rights and singularity and subjectivity as being different rather than forcing people to a consensus.
Yeah.
And I think in therapeutic communities, possibly, when you think about meetings and assemblies, there's an attempt to interpret as a group and to reach there's a certain collective analysis of things that has to do with this.
I think, there's a certain, even now when you hear, first of all, even in Britain, I need to explain to people what a therapeutic community is because they don't know. But even when they talk about therapeutic communities in Britain, there's this idea now, and probably even then, that in some way an institution with a therapeutic community is therapeutic because there's a therapeutic community, and we're kind of closing the analysis as that. It's true that then in the therapeutic community everybody has a voice and you can question this, that and the other, but the structure is in itself, as a premise, because we're having this debate, it's an institution that is therapeutic. And maybe in the French movement it was more like we're trying to see what happens and we're trying to value subjectivity.
Well, I think possibly one important difference is that institutional analysis or institutional psychotherapy, the purpose is that the institution changes with the people that inhabit the institution. So if there's assemblies and meetings, right, then those meetings and assemblies have to be connected to how the institution develops. So let's say what we see nowadays when there's this spirit of collectivity and consensus is that sometimes people have meetings, and this is also outside of mental health care institutions, and you think, okay, this is great, we just have a great social movement and a social moment here, and everyone had a voice, but then the next thing, the next week, next month, everything kind of remains the same because it's usually a one-off, and the institution and the management of the institution are not linked with this kind of bottom ground work.
I can tell you that attempts that I've done to put institutions in question have been blocked by management saying, oh, it's very good that you're having these discussions, this meeting with patients, but it's good that your staff members take responsibilities and management stays out of this.
Right, so that doesn't work. And so it's just a psychotherapy. The purpose is that the whole institution
is questioned.
Is a vehicle of care. And the institution is a social institution, is a material institution, an environmental institution, which means that tables and materials and walls are part of an institution, and corridors and stairs. Why do people stay in stairs and have conversations rather than the conversations they have in meetings? That's very interesting, isn't it? It means that there's a space there that allows for certain things to happen. But the whole environment has to be taken into account. So, for example, in Albord, there was one thing that was called, there was premises that spaces had to be freedom of circulation.
So sorry, just to clarify this, because this is Laborde, which is different from
Saint-Alban.
So this is the new clinic that was set up from scratch.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But maybe before we move on, sorry, everyone that's listening, just going back
it's all right.
to the idea of the institutions, because it's an exciting conversation. When we think about psychiatric democratic, and there's the idea of kind of abolishing the asylums or negating the institution, we're speaking about creating institutions too, aren't we? There's a sense that a process of continuous creation of the institution, or is it absolutely the negation of institutions as such?
Well, there was a constant contradiction in the Basaglian action, because he thought that to destroy the asylum and to create a community as a society that takes care of people within itself and not in these separate places, you needed to open up the asylum in some way. So he saw the therapeutic communities, and he was fascinated by Maxwell Jones, as a way to break the deadlock. But he had zero interest. Like, when people were coming, he could have easily stopped in Gorizia. He would have had a place in the Italian and world history of psychiatry if he had just done what he did in Gorizia. I said, oh, look, we're giving voice to the patients. But he was absolutely determined. That's one of the reasons why he left Gorizia in the end. He was absolutely determined to move beyond the asylum. He had no interest in managing Gorizia as this therapeutic.
Yeah.
So in terms, we can have a discussion about institution in the wider sense, which becomes more complex, what Basaglia would have thought. He had obviously a big interest in institutions more widely as well. And he wrote, like, the first chapter of The Negated Institutions is about the institutions of violence, where he challenges all institutions. But his idea was that it had to be destroyed. So the idea of healing the asylum was just a means to destroy it.
So I understand that. That kind of makes sense. So that
I don't know
that's not so different from the ideas, for example, that I hear in Guattari about the aim of institutional psychotherapy. And do you remember in the beginning where I say, is it institutional psychotherapy or institutional analysis? Institutional psychotherapy is how the term was coined by two psychiatrists, Lucien Bonafé, and I can't remember the name of the other person, I'm sorry. So the movement was already happening, and then it's coined as institutional psychotherapy. And Guattari was against the idea of institutional psychotherapy. He was in favor of institutional analysis as a way of thinking, not an analysis of all institutions, not just an analysis of mental health care institutions, but the movement of rethinking institutions and thinking about the institutional creativity as a means to care that would happen while social fear and across the social, not just about mental health care. But in the movement of institutional psychotherapy or institutional analysis, the idea is, it's interesting that the presupposition is different from the Italian, because it's not about negating the institution. It's about
empowering the institution.
Well, empowering the institution, not seeing the institution separated from the people that inhabit the institution or from the social environment and economic and political where it exists, and using those institutional processes as means of care. But it's about creating institution, recreating the institution, and that's very important. None of the principles of institutional analysis works if the institution is not being recreated collectively, because then it means there's a separation between,
Yeah, but that's the difficulty that I'm having in real life. in roles that I've had, that there is this limit, like there's absolutely no interest in statutory mental health services in Britain. This is my perception. Obviously somebody else will be listening and saying, oh no, this is not true. But in my opinion, you can complain. Please write.
Come to the podcast.
No, come to the podcast. Send us emails. But no, my perception is, there's this view of best practice, which we've talked about a lot. There's this view that there's one way of doing things that is the best way of doing things. There's the caring way of doing things. And therefore, the premise of any opinion you can have is that the institution is not questionable. That the rule, you need to follow rules. You need to, and your competence is evaluated based on how much you adhere to the rules. If you deviate from the rules, I'm having these debates now in social media as well, people telling me, oh no, but you can't think this because it's not the nice guidelines. I'm like, who cares? I mean, and there's a very entrenched mentality that something is right because an authority told you that it's right.
Yeah, that's very problematic, because, and also kind of echoes with something that is a principle of institutional psychotherapy, actually, which is the idea of, well, it's very important not to fall into models.
Yeah.
And the idea of institutional psychotherapy is a continuous questioning of the process of analysis that has to be collective. So there's not a model that works.
Yeah. because we're all individual.
Exactly. So that you cannot really say, oh, how does institutional analysis really work? Susana, can you just write a paper?
Tell me what I need to say.
Tell me, exactly, because I'm asked sometimes, how does it work? So what do you need to do? And I'm saying, but, well, you need to understand the idea of what it means. It's like a daily practice of collective analysis, of discussion, of making. Yeah. And then analyzing the local pragmatics at play, each institution, then put into practice. Yeah.
There's such an opposite trend in Britain. Like being told, like I'm working with clients and you know, it's happened to me in the past that I've been told, oh no, this is the template of what you need to say. But this is so institutionalizing. Yeah. But you know, you can't say, "Oh, institute manager, this is institutionalizing." Yeah. You know, but you say, "I don't want to follow this template. I just want to work with this person as a human being, validating myself as a human being and the other person as a human being." Mm.
That's interesting, because it's possibly the template's probably not that wrong. But well,
depends what we mean with wrong.
No, yeah. But for example, after at least in the kind of the history of France of development of mental health care, after this movement of institutional analysis and kind of you know, mental health movements in France, there was the sectorization of psychiatry happened, I think, in the end of the 60s, which is closer to what we have today. Yeah. And one of the motors of that change, kind of legal change, was also the institutional psychotherapy movement. But it's interesting because the people that were at the core of that movement then became extremely dissatisfied with what happened with the sectorization of psychiatry, because they said, this all looks good in paper. But actually, people are giving instructions to behave in A, B, or C manner, and they are not having the daily meetings and the daily process of questioning and rethinking and collective education that we had before. But there are no teams that are being continuously self-practicing and self-learning. Questioning.
Well, what I could say, like saying a Basaglian thing here, that was Basaglian's criticism of R.D. Laing, for example, did his Kingsley Hall, and acting kind of outside of the system. About the fact that either you change systems from within, and for Basaglia, the psychiatric hospital institution was in itself institutionalizing, so you can try moving things up and down and make it look all better, but in the end, it's going to be an institution of violence. And the only way to really go beyond this is to destroy the institution. So this would be, I think that would make me think that he had a point. But then, you know, I don't want to say, we know that in Italy, really, beyond Trieste, and another, it's not just Trieste, by the way, that has good mental health services, there's lots of good stuff in Italy, but there are a lot of problems in other places where they've just been defunded. But it is true, as much as I think that, I mean, I've seen obviously people, when I was in Trieste, people that say things or do things that I think, oh no, I wouldn't do that, or I didn't like that. But generally, I see the trend in Trieste is that you can question things. So you can say, oh, I disagree with this. To me, and I've said many times with my supervisors there, I would engage in very long conversations about what we were doing, which I was often very critical as well of. And because I have this critical mindset, there's never a perfection that we've achieved, right? And a healthy thing of an institution or of a group is that you can constantly question things. And I would have endless conversations. I hear nothing in Britain. It's really seen as something not that you don't do. You don't start questioning what your manager is saying about policies.
Do you think this is kind of connected to now I'm making you question. Yeah. Do you think this is connected to kind of a crisis in the profession too? Because, you know, everyone that works in mental health care is in need of care at the moment, because you know, the professions can be quite precarious, very extremely demanding, and most of the people I speak with, they feel they don't really have the support. They don't have support in the workplace. They work long hours, and it's very, very demanding.
Yeah, I think so. But also, not only very demanding, but it's very they deprive the profession of any value, because if you go in this field and you think I'm going to make a difference, and I'm going to use, this is my way of doing things, I would like to do this, and then you're given a template, and you need to take care of this person exactly like anybody else would take care of that person, and you need to take care of the person with that label of that disorder, just like anybody else who would have that label, then it's just an exercise, a ritualistic exercise that